Hey everybody, can you guys see and hear me? Hello, happy Saturday, welcome. Hello. Okay, so I don't really have any crazy announcements since I've made announcements the past 2 days. So I think we'll just dive right into it today. And I know that these are the really popular webinars. I'm sort of thinking, like, I'm always trying to tweak things and make things better and improve and grow, because growth is such a high need for me. And I'm thinking, like, every month we should do an open attachment style webinar. I'm thinking every month we should do a belief reprogramming webinar, because we talk a lot about that and put it into context. So basically, if you have questions around these things, we can still do all of our open Q&A webinars as well. We'll do one of those each week or two of those each week. I think that was more requested, a workbook, and then we'll have these other things that we always go to that are where most of the questions will want to be asked. And that way everybody feels like, they get heard and seen and their needs get met. So anyways, okay. I hope everybody's having an amazing start to their Saturday. I don't know about you guys in different parts of the world, but I know here in Toronto, it's like fall weather, like it's like jacket weather already. It's so crazy. I hope everybody's doing well, and let's dive right into it. Okay, so Tiffany says, hi, Tiffany. What should an AA do when FA deactivates later? So today we're going to talk about the 6 stages. So I'll go through a quick overview as well. At a point, I'll start with a few questions, and I'll go over the 6 stages for anybody who's new or hasn't taken the advanced attachment style courses yet, and then we'll really go with those questions specifically. So what should an AA do when FA deactivates later in an established relationship? Power struggle / stability phase. My FA is truly wonderful to me 80% of the time. He's a people pleaser who overgives at work, with family, friends, me, until he shuts down. When he deactivates, I'm okay for a couple weeks as I notice him withdrawing. Then I am triggered as it becomes clear he isn't interested in connecting. My core wounds, I am unwanted, rejected, abandoned, show up. In the early months of the relationship, I expressed him disappearing for days hurt, so he calls or texts almost daily, but those interactions are painful for me. The last few times he deactivated, I suggested we take a break from communicating for a few days, trying to meet his needs for time and space. It feels good to meet a need for him, but then I am triggered. My need for romantic connection isn't met while he's withdrawing, and it's worse when we aren't talking at all. I spiral, buy into the story that I need to end the relationship, and put myself through the misery as if we were actually breaking up. How can I handle this better? Okay, beautiful. So let's talk about a few things here all together, okay? This is a great starting point of the webinar. Number one, I really believe in developing proactive strategies for things instead of reactive strategies for things. The more we can do that, the better we're going to feel in our relationship dynamics. So what I would start by doing is I would start by asking yourself, like, what can I do proactively that's going to get my need met for connection? So I would start by having a pattern where it's like, listen, let's sit down, especially since you're already like past honeymoon phase of the relationship. I would sit down and be like, let's go through. Let's talk about like what our baseline needs are. So when you need space and time, I'm still going to need connection and probably validation and reinforcement or certainty. And so let's have a conversation. When you need that extra space and time, can you have like, words of affirmation for me in the relationship? Can we have, an evening that we spend together that week that we just watch a movie and we don't really talk, and you just sort of get that quiet time to yourself? Like, whatever it is, whatever creative strategies you can come up with, sit down and have a conversation ahead of time for what you can put into place. I always say to people too, like, if there's a dynamic and both people are very busy or overgiving, have something where you have like a 15-minute phone call once a day, and that's your time together. Or have something that's just very simple, very easy, like low-hanging fruit, a habit you can participate in the relationship with two people in, that's going to provide the maximum output for both people's needs. Okay, so one person gets their needs met and then can protect the other person's space or show up for it, and it works functionally. So the more proactive habits we can put into place, the better. The next thing I see in here is I hear that you tried to meet his need, but that was a sacrifice, not a compromise. So I hear that you tried to meet a need to give him extra time and space, but that went exactly directly against what you needed, which was time and space, or time together, right? And less space. And so we have to be aware of the difference, because that's only going to make us spiral more. A compromise is both people put their needs exactly on the table and you keep digging until you have a solution. So for example, you might say, I need more time. Good. Why? Well, I need to feel connected and validated. Okay, I need more space. Why? I need to self-soothe. I've been overgiving at work and with family and wherever else you said he overgives. And so, great. What's the solution? How can we both get our needs met? Why don't we just have a 15-minute habit where we touch base for 15 minutes at the end of every day, and then, or whatever it is for you, like pick something that works for your time, your schedule, your needs, even if it's just introducing more words of affirmation into the relationship dynamic at times when he's deactivating. Hey, I just want to know that we're still in a good place. And so you can actually get both needs met where he gets more time, but you still get your baseline needs met because the quality of time you get with him, or the way your needs are really encompassed in the time you spend together, maybe with extra validation or certainty or whatever it might be, still makes you feel like your needs are met as well. So we have to be creative in those areas, but we don't want to make sacrifices where we're like, oh, he needs space and I need closeness, but I'm just going to give him his space and hope that it feels good to meet his needs. No. You don't want to leave yourself out of the equation. You want to take yourself into consideration. And you're going to find that you spiral if you do sacrifice instead of compromise, because not only did you not take yourself into consideration and not get your need met, but you abandon yourself in the process, which means you emptied, you poked a hole in your bucket, and now your bucket's leaking at the same time. And so now you're going to feel extra need to get your needs met externally because you weren't meeting them internally and showing up for you at the same time. So that's what I would work through. When the core wounds come up, question your stories, take the time to actually find counteracting pieces of evidence. Like, okay, how do I know that he wants me? Well, we've been in a relationship for a certain period of time already. These are just his patterns or wounds. They're not a reflection of how he cares about me. Find pieces of evidence, but then still express your needs, right? You still have to do the needs work and say, so you want to stabilize your emotions, but then you want to be able to say, look, this is what my experience is, and this is what a solution would be. And the more you can paint the picture of the need, be super clear about it, the faster it will get met. So those are great and very important things to put into place. The good habits in the power struggle phase to create proactive strategies to avoid extra power struggling conflict. And in the stability phase, where it's all about putting habits into our relationship and really getting things in that work for us as individuals in a relationship dynamic. So great question. I love that. Okay, so Elena. Hello, Elena. I hope I'm saying that correctly. FA with on and off connection with DA. We dated 14 years ago for a few months, and then I ended it when he pulled away. He reaches out periodically. And last autumn, we reconnected and the cycle repeated. I told him that if he doesn't do the work, that I won't reconnect with him when he reaches out again. He chose not to work through it. I still hope he reaches out, but how to handle this? How you handle this is appropriate, right? Because if he's a DA, if he's being very sporadic, reaches out here and there, then goes missing, the cycle's repeating itself. It's like that very cliche quote, right? It's like insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, hoping for a different outcome. Well, you can't keep putting yourself through that over and over again, not just because it's not going to make functional sense and be fair to you, but also because you violate the relationship to yourself in the process when you know it goes against your needs, you know it doesn't feel good, and yet the cycle repeats. And so because you did the right thing, you set a boundary, you communicated. If you still hope he reaches out, what I would be doing is I'd be looking at doing the work to heal what in you is still longing for him. So I would be, instead of how do I navigate if he does reach out, I would be putting my energy into solution for self. So I would be going, what in me was what was being met through him, what needs were being met, or what traits am I attracted to in him, and how can I either start cultivating those traits more within myself, or how can I start meeting those needs for myself or getting them met through other healthy relationships in my life, so that there's no part of my subconscious that associates those things that I really do need with him and longs for him when I'm actually really longing for those needs, because him as a package overall isn't providing something that's healthy enough to participate with two people in. So that's absolutely the approach that I would be taking. And great question. Good morning, Shannon. How are you? Okay, so Annette says, I have a quick follow-up to one of my questions from the past webinar. For core beliefs that do not focus on personal core wounds, like my belief around people leaving once in a stable relationship, they will get bored. Should we still be doing the reprogramming every day for 21 days, or is it enough to go through the excellent question. Is it enough to go through the emotional processing tools for those beliefs? You're going to know based on the output of how strong the wound is. So, for example, if you okay, so you have two avenues you can take, right? People will leave once in a stable relationship, they will get bored, okay? So let's just pick the second one. They will get bored because that's the one we talked about more. So people will get bored in a relationship. What does that mean, or why is that bad? Well, then I'll be abandoned, right? Or I'll be alone, or I'll be betrayed, or I will be, right? So it's going to be, the meaning is actually still going to be related to a core wound. So that's why we call those things in that chart that I put everywhere in the school, because I want everybody to know them all by heart. That's why we call them our core wounds, because every other belief is still going to be related back to that. However, sometimes it's more functional to work on other beliefs instead of the core wounds, right? Because sometimes our mind's not really making that association at a preconscious level where that thing is affecting us the most. So what you want to be able to do is ask yourself, like, okay, how prevalent is this? And does it is it better to work on the belief itself because it's very specific for me and that's a fear I find coming up in my internal dialogue the most? Or is it better to do the underlying programming, or both? And then if because it's a belief for you, Annette, that people will get bored because it's like in your subconscious, it's not just like a thought that's the output of some random triggering event, because it's actually like part of your psyche. Like you believe this about relationships, you've been carrying this for a long time. I would absolutely do full reprogramming on it. But that's the way you're going to be able to know how to navigate, is like, is this a part of my identity in terms of what I believe about relationships? Is this something that's been living in my subconscious for a long time? Has this been a fear that pops up irrespective of the relationship I'm in? So it's not situation specific or context specific. It's actually like this overlaying like fear that comes up quite periodically. And in that case, do the belief reprogramming work for sure. Excellent question. Hello, Shannon. Morning here, but I think morning for a lot of people. Yeah, you're on the West Coast. There's a lot of people from the West Coast in here, I think. Hello, Rochelle. How are you? So Rochelle says, when an AA has a breakup with an FA, is it more devastating for them when an AA has a breakup? Is it more devastating for them rather than breaking up with a DA? I have just observed an AA family member go through a breakup with an FA, and she was devastated after breaking up with an FA. And she said no one can love her with that much intensity. So, excellent question and excellent observation. We definitely can't say that as a whole, right? Because every person's going to be unique and specific. The underlying reasons are going to be more likely geared in the direction of, yes, an FA with an AA with an FA, it would hurt more than with a DA. Why? Because so much of what attraction is based off of, and so much of what relationships can come to if they're unhealthy, is, number one, attraction is largely based off of people meeting subconscious needs that we haven't had met. And like, what do you think the needs are that an AA most often hungers for? Well, that like presence, that validation, that connection, and a lot of FAs really give that. So yes, it's more likely that would hurt more. Number two, the other component in there would probably be like all of the, to a certain degree, codependency. And so the more codependent we are in a relationship, the more we set ourselves up to have an identity crisis if a relationship ends, where we feel like, wow, we derive so many of our needs and these traits that we were so infatuated with, we became whole through. And so at a subconscious level, we really enmesh. And then when that's gone, it can feel like a lot more lost. It can feel like, oh, I lost a purpose, or I lost part of what I thought I was like living for, or, you know, a lot of people will report things like that to me. So now keep in mind, a dismissive avoidant could meet other needs that an anxious preoccupied has, or have even, you know, more expression of traits that are more repressed for the AA. So we can't say like person to person, that will for sure be why. But as a general rule, yes, I do see more anxious preoccupied individuals feeling in more pain after a breakup when there's a fearful avoidant, because there's usually such depth of connection, which the AA hungers for. So when that goes, and because there's more context for codependency, like those two will become codependent quite often in the early stages of a relationship quite quickly. And then all of a sudden it's like, whoa, all this connection and closeness. And then to lose that, the juxtaposition of that one compared to the other feels that much more intense. So great question. Okay, so Gabriella says, and good observation too, by the way. Hi, Gabriella. Hi, since our bad argument a couple of weeks ago, I felt it has actually brought us closer together strangely, but I notice, that he is being a bit more cocky and show-offy in his conversations. Is this hurt ego or a subconscious devaluing technique? Should I be concerned about this? Excellent question. And hi, Ebo. I see Ebo's comment right below. And Ebo, I just want to say there's a little bit of a delay when I get the questions in real time. And I saw your comments after I pushed end stream. They came in like after the thing ended, because I guess you would have sent them, but they take like maybe 30 seconds or so to come through. And you're not a squeaky wheel, so don't worry about that. I just wanted to clarify that. I saw you say that and I was like, oh, you're not a squeaky wheel. So anyways, okay. So, okay. Two things, Gabriella, and this is really important. So yes, it can bring you closer together. That's actually a sign that you guys have done some work around it. It's a really good sign in terms of like how you're showing up in the relationship. So I applaud you for that. But the cockiness is probably not a devaluing technique, but an insecurity technique. So it's okay, this person feels insecure, a little bit of hurt ego, things like that. And then, wants to puff themselves up because they're trying to equilibrate. And that's what the mind and subconscious are designed to do to a certain degree, is find equilibrium and wholeness. So that's probably what it is. If by doing that, there's some kind of devaluation that's happening where you're feeling uncomfortable, you have to address it. You have to set a boundary around it. Otherwise, you're going to build up, and this is very common for FAs, to not notice that you feel a certain way in real time and then notice it later when it's already come out and it's too late. So if something about it is making you feel uncomfortable, you just have to say either like, hey, the way you said that felt like it was devaluing towards me. I'm sure you don't mean anything by it, but I just want you to know, and I want to set a boundary around it. Or you can say something like, hey, what did you mean by that? And you can open the dialogue. To me, I received it this way. And so you can open the dialogue in a healthy way in real time, or you can bring it up gently in a different way. And then I would just follow that up by saying, otherwise I feel we're a lot closer because of what so bring it up in a light, simple, easy way, just transparency, introduce that level of communicating into the relationship so that it's sort of like you're saving grace for later. So it doesn't come out in a not so nice way. And because you owe it to yourself to set a boundary around things that make you feel uncomfortable. So great question. Hi, Shannon. Okay, so Shannon says, I'm considering dating someone who I do not think will be someone I date seriously because of age. She's too young for me. I think she's she's FA. She's expressed romantic interest in me, but I haven't reciprocated yet because I was mulling it over. Any advice? FYI, I hope you're recovering well. Thank you so much. I'm recovering super well. The recovery was easy. It was just the little bit before my appendix was taken out that was not easy. Okay, so let's see here. So here's what I would do. I would get really clear about what the barriers are. Is it okay to date somebody that you don't think you're going to date seriously? Absolutely. It's okay to do any of that stuff. But what becomes not okay is if we lead somebody on in the process. So if you're just dating to like go on a couple of dates and have some companionship and just touch base and things like that, that's okay. That's sometimes the process of getting to know and understand what we want, especially when we come to find ourselves as people, right? It's a very interesting experience for individuals. And I've seen this firsthand, seeing so many people go through this. But it's interesting to be sort of unconscious to yourself, to not know who you are, what you want, to not recognize your dating patterns, and to then all of a sudden, your needs and your desires, and you start to identify your boundaries and your wounds, and then to go back into dating. And sometimes it's healthy to go on different dates with different people and learn further who you would be now as this person who's sort of found yourself. So I don't think it's a bad thing. The only place it can get messy is if you go in and you don't say, hey, like, I'm not sure if I really want to date seriously. And then you lead somebody to believe that. And then, of course, it can become a bit of an injustice to that person. So I think it's great that you took the time to consider it. And I would say if you find yourself interested, and like you can do this too, you can say, you said she's too young for you. Write out what that really means, okay? Because I've seen people with large age differences get along extremely well, and I've seen people with large age differences and it's like a sinking ship. So it's not the age, it's all the meaning we give to it. Is it that she's not emotionally mature enough? Is it that she's in a different phase in her life? Is it that your friends and family wouldn't agree with it? Is it, is it that you're just not on the same page? You have different morals and values. You get really specific. And then when you do have that conversation, or if, let's say, you go on a date and you can just say, listen, I want to let you know out of the gates, I'm happy to get to know you. And I do feel something towards you, but I don't think this is going to be something that we can take too seriously because of the age difference. And what that really specifically means is I think we're probably going to be in different chapters of our lives right now. And so happy to hang out, but I want to be really clear about how I, feel going into this. So something like that. And, you could do that on your second date, your first date, whatever it is. But just make sure you're clear about what exactly that means and what your exact concerns are so that you can communicate them really well. And great question. Okay, so Lauren says, hi, Lauren. Hi, Thais. As a DA, how do I make myself want my partner to be around more? You're so sweet. Okay, great question. I love that question. So the biggest reason, so how do I make myself want my partner to be around more? I first have to understand what in me wants to create space and what those core root reasons are, right? So then I can uproot those obstacles so I can want to feel comfortable having that attention and connection. So normally what it starts off with is that you might not realize, but there's this deep subconscious, almost unconscious wall that's like you don't expect that it's possible for somebody to meet your needs. And I don't mean to be supportive, to be a good dating partner, but I think you think the deep needs that you might have to be really seen, really heard, really understood, to share yourself. You probably have made up your mind at some point a long time ago that you can't express your needs directly and get them met. That's not how relationships work because that was probably your experience. And so when that happens, it's very draining for dismissive avoidance to go into relationships thinking that, okay, well, when somebody comes over or spends time with me or we go for dinner, it's me doing favors for them or me meeting needs for them. And there's not a reciprocal feedback system, right? There's not energy coming back in. So I'm just putting energy out. And so I have to manage my energy and manage my time in order for that to happen. A lot of DAs carry this belief pattern usually that it's just going to be them meeting the other person's needs, okay? So see if that shows up for you. And if that's the case, try to take some time to ask yourself, what would I actually want or need in a relationship to feel really good and really empowered in the dynamic itself? And try to get really clear about that and start expressing your needs consistently in real time, just a little bit. It doesn't have to be crazy, just so that you can feel like you're getting your bucket filled back up when you're putting your energy out. Okay. And then another exercise I would do is I'd write out all the things that make you feel that you want to avoid spending time together. What are all those things? What are the triggers? Is it that I feel like if I get fully seen, that I'm going to feel shame because I have a shame wound that I carried that I shouldn't be carrying because, my childhood and things that I experienced in terms of maybe patterns of emotional neglect were not my fault, but my maybe childhood mind interpreted things that way. So do I spend a lot of energy trying to not be seen or trying to be seen in a certain way? Do I spend a lot of energy, what are the things that exhaust me about the interactions? Or why do I value my space so much? And what needs do I get through that? And how can I bring those needs into a relationship so I can get my needs that I would meet on my own met in a relationship as well? So you're putting out all your stories, all the obstacles, then doing the work around those, and then trying to identify your needs and then bring those needs into the relationship dynamic as well. Okay, so I hope that all makes sense. It's a great question, and I love that you're asking that. I think that's a fantastic question to ask as a DA. Hello, Jen. Okay, so Jen says, hi, Thais. My husband and I are consciously uncoupling. He's a very private DA and doesn't want to tell his parents until January. Is this a healthy idea? All of my family knows. Where does my responsibility rest in the situation? Your response, great question. And I'm sorry to hear that you're consciously uncoupling, but it's nice that you use that term, because to me, I hear that you're doing a good job of it and you're really communicating through it, which is wonderful. So here's what I would say. Your responsibility lies to yourself right now. So your responsibility lies to, do you have to lie to his parents or hide things or do things that make you feel uncomfortable to try to please him? Or do you not see his parents that often and so it's not that big of a deal? And you're just not actively reaching out and saying something to the parents. So what you have to do is you have to get really clear and tune in with yourself. What do you need in this situation and what feels comfortable for you? Do you have to go out of your way and lie or hide or avoid or do things that make you feel uncomfortable or out of integrity in relationship to self? And if that's the case, you have to evaluate what your boundaries are in the situation and you have to bring that to the table. Okay, so you might say, listen, I don't feel comfortable doing that and hiding things. If you're comfortable with me like not spending a lie or hide anything, then I can try to support your boundary that way, but that's as far as I will go. And if anybody asks me, there's no way I'm lying. Or, like whatever it is, you have to get really clear about what that looks like for you. And then you have to make sure you show up for your boundary. And that's the only answer, because anything else is going to create resentment or it could be out of integrity and damage the relationship you have to yourself. So I would get really clear about that and then have a nice, healthy, conscious form of a communication accordingly with him. And great question. Yes, Evo, I lead almost all of the webinars. I just last week I had an appendix surgery, and so I had somebody step in and do them. But I lead pretty much all the webinars. In the future, we're definitely going to have like more guests and stuff like that, and we'll have people come in and do different things. Or we'll have like a guest week every so often, and things like that are all going to be in the mix long term when we do a few other things first that we're doing. But it'll be mostly me that you'll be seeing. Great question. Okay, let's see. Hi, Francis. Hello, Michelle. Okay, so Michelle says, as an AA, I panic after an intimate evening with my boyfriend. Why is that and how can I self-soothe? Okay, really good question. So it's not going to be the intimacy itself. It's going to be the meaning you give to the situation always. And that is like a principle. So when we get triggered, when we feel uncomfortable, it's never the situation. It can't possibly be. It's the programming, the meaning, the subconscious associations we have that are either activated by the situation or that we project onto the situation, okay? So here's what you do. Get a pen and paper and write out, what are all my fears what are all the thought patterns that I start thinking about and fears that come up for me after intimacy in the relationship? So do I write out that, and so do that first, okay? So maybe you make the situation mean this person got what they wanted and they're not going to be interested in me any longer, or whatever it is, like, right? Because those are the painful stories and stuff we hear in society, and sometimes those things are true in certain contexts. So write out all the fears that come to mind, and then you want to sit and you want to question all of your stories one by one, okay? And that's your first step. So can I 100% know that my boyfriend is no longer interested in me if we have sex? Like whatever it is, right? Then number two, I want you to ask yourself, what needs do I have around intimacy? Like maybe you're being intimate and it's too soon for you. Maybe you are being intimate and then you leave and you wanted to sleep over at his place. Like whatever it is, you have to get super, super clear about your needs. So the tool that will help you do all of this, and it's laid out really well, is the thought reprogramming / emotional processing tool in the Emotional Mastery and Belief Reprogramming course. It's like one of the most important tools for self-soothing. I would say it's the most important tool, because it's the only reasons we suffer are because we're telling ourselves pain, like really scary stories that create suffering, or we have unmet needs, which is pain. And otherwise we can't have negative emotional experiences. So we have to get really clear about what those things are and work through both. And that tool will help guide you through that process. And then you'll be able to resolve whatever the situation is, okay? And the expression of your needs will be a boundary. So if you're like, oh, I need to have words of affirmation after we sleep together, or because I'm afraid, or I don't, whatever it is, you want to be able to bring that conversation into your relationship, set a boundary, speak up, do all those things so that you feel empowered, and that will be your self-soothing. The lack of being soothed just means there's a problem that needs to be addressed at the subconscious level. So great question. Hello, Natalie. Okay, so Natalie says, this week I set a boundary with my DAX that I'd like to work on things with him, but if he can't participate, I will have to cut communication and move on. It felt so empowering. I then left him to go away and think about what he wants because I know he never knows how he feels when put on the spot. How long do you expect a DA, beautiful, to take deciding this? Okay, so here's a really interesting thing. So number one, congratulations. You should feel empowered because it's an empowering thing to do. And literally, sorry, let me just turn off the thing. Okay, so that's a really empowering thing to do. And like, that's what you have to do in these dynamics. We have to be able to show up for ourselves, decide where we're at. And if there's these back and forth things that aren't fulfilling us, exactly what you said is perfect. Okay, so that's wonderful. And then here's the really interesting part. They can take a little bit to decide, but usually they don't know how to communicate about their decision. So a lot of dismissive avoidance, especially in the earlier stages of relationships, don't know how to say, I've decided I want to work on things. It feels too vulnerable for them. And so they will do something like reach out by sending a text message or a picture of something. And they think usually a lot of the time that them communicating with you is showing you the answer, because a lot of dismissive avoidants have learned to communicate indirectly. Sometimes that was the communication model in their home, and sometimes that was just the way of sort of surviving their environment in childhood when being vulnerable just felt unsafe. So what I would do is I would wait for a little bit, and then I would try to set up the conversation. So I'd wait for like at least, I would give it no more than 2 weeks, maybe a week to 10 days. You should really have some kind of movement. And so I would give it time, and then I would return to it, and I would say, hey, how are things going? And I would try to see if there's a lot of sort of movement in the connection and him really like trying to communicate and show up. And then I would say, even though it's difficult, I would lead. It's like sort of like the you want to lead him to be able to know what to say, because it's sort of like speaking a different language sometimes. So you want to say something like, hey, like, we don't have to jump right into something and move really fast, but do you want to try to work towards something, and sort of open the question so that he doesn't have to say it himself. Now, long term, that's not going to be appropriate. Like, long term, he has to be able to speak up for himself, but you're going to sort of have to be the leader in the dynamic at the beginning, because you're the one with the tools and the resources and all these different things. And so then you can introduce a conversation. If he says, yeah, like I am interested in doing that, great. Then meet for coffee or meet for dinner or whatever it is. And then say, like, what do you need? And ask those questions so that you guys can have that conversation. And you might have to be the one driving the boat at first, because you're the one that like wants to go to the destination that you're going, and he might have been okay just sitting on the beach side, right? So you have to initiate, but then he has to take accountability for showing up, having those types of conversations, and helping to be on board, and to be able to meet your needs when you communicate them, right? So all really important stuff, and great work, and you should feel empowered. That's very exciting. Hello, Audrey. Audrey, all I see is you just saying at Thais. I just scrolled up and I don't see an earlier comment from you, but you might have just been saying hi. So if so, hello. I'm doing FA and Secure advanced courses right now, side by side. Amazing. Okay, so Princess K. Hi, Princess K. You changed your YouTube name. Oh, by the way, I'm so sorry. I can't change the YouTube name. I know you guys asked me a while ago and I didn't forget about it. All of our links and branding and marketing. So I know you guys have to type out like at Personal Development School -- Gibson, but just Control-C it, right? I wouldn't want to tell you guys this. Write it out once, Control-C it, so that you can just hit Control-V and then type your question all the time. So it won't take so long. I'm sure most of you guys figured that out already, but just in case, it'll save you time. Okay, so Ebo says, hi, Ebo. Hi, Thais. Thank you for your help last time. I have a follow-up question. My DA left me AA after 9 months. We were doing PDS to try to overcome volatility and heal wounds coming up. I saw him trying hard to push his comfort zone. I sensed his breaking point from the beginning. He cast a lot of doubt during conflict and deactivated quite a bit. This was very triggering. Said he was weary of conflict from the beginning because he grew up with this idea that conflict is bad, but always came back and recommitted. Took me to meet his family, said he wanted to work towards a long-term future. You mentioned It seemed DA was showing reservations early on. Can you speak more to that? Was he not invested as he appeared? Were his reservations fear-based? The thing that you said, I can't remember word for word what you said in the actual last webinar, but you made it seem like he came into the dynamic and was essentially saying, if there's conflict again in the relationship, that's the end of the relationship. And like that was my impression from your comments. I forget the way you phrased it, but it was sort of like he was thinking conflict. And a lot of DAs carry these belief patterns. If there's conflict, the relationship is ending. So he might have gone into this is just I'm really making an assumption here because I have, limited information about who he is and all these different things. But it wouldn't surprise me if he came in thinking like, if we're doing the work and there's still conflict, then that means it must not be working, because it's so common for dismissive avoidance to think a conflict makes or breaks a relationship, it ends it. And so because he wasn't exposed to fighting and things like that, I think he probably went into doing the work thinking that's going to make there be no conflict, not thinking that, no, we're still going to have growing pains and that's a natural part of the evolution of a relationship. And we're going to learn how to be really good at navigating conflict so it becomes healthy conflict instead of unhealthy conflict. And so that's what I sort of perceived from your message that I had read. But I think there was a lot of effort for sure. No. And I don't think he appeared to be invested, but wasn't, because DAs they're very good with their boundaries. They won't say, I don't want to do this, and then they won't do things they don't want to do. It's very rare. Maybe sometimes we'll have our people-pleasing DAs who will do those things a little bit, but not to the degree where they invest their time. Dismissives very, very much value their time. So I think what probably happened is that the conflict thing was the make or break, and it would have been useful for him to do reprogramming work around what he makes conflict mean and his fears about conflict and understanding the difference between healthy and unhealthy conflict. So great question. I hope that makes sense. Seemed he oscillated from loving me. Yeah. And the seeming despising is the shutting down, because there was a lot of emotion and care. And so the shutting down, the harder they shut down, usually the more of a defense mechanism they're trying to put up, which is sort of symbolic of how much pain the person can be in. So I hope that makes sense. Okay. So hold on. Did I misprint this case question? Yeah. How do breaks or breakups affect the stages of dating? Interesting question. Reconnection / closure seems to be in a stage that's prior to dating, since there's so much resistance. Yes. And then when you start back up again, you're going to start in the dating phase. But if like in theory, right? If you break up and then you restart a relationship, you're going to go through the stages again, but faster. And then you're going to go right back into the stage you were in more quickly. So for example, if you broke up and you were in the power struggle phase of a relationship, and then there's a break and there's not talking, and then you rekindle, what you'll often see is that couples will then go back into the dating phase and honeymoon phase, maybe dating phase for like a week or two, honeymoon phase for like a month or two. Usually it's like closer to like a month and a half, and then back into the power struggle phase again. And you have to resolve the core roots of the issues from that phase. And until you do, that cycle will keep repeating. It's a really excellent question. Compared to the newness or excitement of dating, does ending in the power struggle phase or later mean you'd run through the initial stages faster? Yes, exactly. No plans this time, just asking. Beautiful. Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. Exactly. At Thais' example, he'd like me to cook dinner more than I cook it for myself, as lunch is my primary meal. Audrey, I don't have earlier questions from you. I just see at Thais and then that. So you might have come in really early and the question's timed out, but feel free to send it again and I'll keep an eye out. Okay, so the next question I have, hello, Francis and Phil, hello, and Jamie and Furea, hello. Okay, so hi, Nicholas. Okay, so let me see here. Guys are in Atlanta, 7 p.m. in the UK. Hi, Deanna and Annalisa. Okay, hello, Ruby and Magni. So good to see you guys. And Anna, thank you so much. Thank you. Hello, Ben and Ty. Okay, so Ty says, I think this is the next question I have. Let me just make 100% sure. Oh no, I see Audrey. Oh no, that's to Tiffany. Okay. So the next question I see is Ty. Hi, Ty. Can you talk a little bit about an FA leaning strong DA, prioritizing power over the relationship? Does that mean they don't really love you? Okay. So I don't want to be like making judgments because I don't know this person. But I would say, so does it mean they don't really love you? Absolutely not. Okay. Just because somebody's prioritizing something else doesn't mean that they don't have love for somebody in a relationship. It's usually just a reflection of them having a different order of personality needs. But when, power in the context of a power struggle, good thing you continued that. Okay. Because I was thinking you meant like this person's really focused on power. And I was just going to say to you, like, if that person's highest need is power and they're like out trying to have a career that gives them power or make more money so they can have power over others or something like that, it's probably not going to be the healthiest context. Usually that's, if somebody is really power seeking, usually they're pretty much in trauma. Because if somebody is really seeking a lot of power, and this is a side note because I understand now, seeing the second part of your question, this isn't your question, but if somebody's extremely power seeking, it means at some point in their life they had a lot of feelings of disempowerment. And if somebody wants to be empowered in their life, like EMPOWERED, that's one thing. If somebody wants to feel like they're in charge of themselves and they've got good habits and patterns and routines and they know how to regulate their emotions and be empowered as a human, that's excellent. But if somebody's seeking power, like power over others, usually we can tell that they're pretty in a space of being in trauma, and that trauma is still governing a lot of their behavior and decisions. So that's its own separate dialogue. In terms of somebody prioritizing power over you in the relationship, in terms of the power struggle, that doesn't have to be that they're seeking power over you. It can be that they are terrified or don't have the tools or availability or awareness to express their emotions effectively. So you might see somebody and it seems like they're trying to be right, but maybe they're terrified of saying how they really feel. Maybe they're terrified of being wrong and then thinking that they're bad. Maybe they're terrified. And so it's not like they're seeking power over you, but maybe they're not willing to be vulnerable. And so it seems like that, right? Now, if they're seeking power over you, you'll know it because they'll try to manipulate and control your life and things like that. And in that case, that's unhealthy. And you really want to have some strong boundaries and potentially just get away from that dynamic. But if it's just that they're not willing to be vulnerable, you can do a couple of things. Okay. It doesn't mean they don't really love you. I would say to this person, hey, like, it's okay to tell me what you need. It's okay to say what you're really feeling. And dig at them a little bit, like, hey, you seem upset, but are you really afraid? And it would be okay if you are, and so open the dialogue as much as you can, but just make sure the entire time that the person's willing to do the work with you in the relationship. Because if they're never going to open, they're never going to do anything, then it can become an injustice. If you're showing up, you're doing the work, you're being vulnerable, but they're not back. A lot of FAs leaning strong DA are terrified of vulnerability and have no idea how to do it, and feel like if they become vulnerable, it's like collapsing their identity, because a lot of their identity's been built around avoiding things like that. And FAs leaning DAs, as a general rule, I find can be very sensitive people. So that's really important to all take note of. And I would lead by example in terms of introducing vulnerability into the conversation, and then ask deeper questions to gain understanding and insight into what that person's experiencing back, as long as the dynamics are healthy enough to do so. So great question. And hello, Nathan and Aviel. Hi, guys. How are you? Hi, Julia. So Julia says, hi, Thais. As an FA side AA, my FA DA and I are in power struggle stage on and off for a year now. I realize that I have not set boundaries and needs with him since falling in love with him. We communicated better when friends before getting together. He runs for months at a time and I become very anxious. I saw him 2 weeks ago. Great night. Great night. And he sent a beautiful text 2 days later, excited to see me soon, said let's touch base soon, but I chased him following this accidentally when I meant to just be loving. No word from him since. Has been 2 weeks now since his text. We have rejected each other so much over the past few years. He keeps deactivating and it's awful. I haven't set my boundaries with him and haven't expressed them properly. So not really fair to blame him for not meeting my boundaries. He's very respectful when we are together. I am scared he will abandon because of my childhood enmeshment trauma. And so that is what happens. I will continue. Do I do in terms of expressing? What do I do in terms of expressing boundaries when he is deactivating? Wait to hear from him first. Had enmeshment trauma in childhood, FYI. And okay, so a few things in here. I want to acknowledge you for recognizing your part and not blaming, because that doesn't put the power in his hands, right? So when you go, oh, I realize I haven't been communicating his boundaries, so I can't fault him. That's very strong of you, and I want to highly acknowledge it. And at the same time, that's not mutually exclusive to you showing up for your boundaries, okay? So and because a lot of people go, this person's bad, this person's this, that, and the other. It doesn't matter that I didn't express my boundaries. He should know. And that mentality and that attitude is going to prove to be toxic in relationships long-term, because it gives a rationalization or justification to assume that people should be mind reading or fortune telling or all these different things that are going to make our relationships hard. So I see that you're not doing that, and I think that's excellent. At the same time, you absolutely have to start doing that. Otherwise, it's just going to be a tremendous injustice to yourself in a relationship. Okay. So, because I think it's already a bit unfair that there's like 2 weeks of deactivating, but if that was part of the habits or patterns, or you've never said anything about it before or how it's affected you, then you're right. Like, he's not going to know. So here's what I would do. I would absolutely dive in and be like, what are the boundaries I need to express right now and going forward? And I want you to notice as well, when I don't express my boundaries, I abandon myself, or I repress my needs, I abandon myself, same thing. And then my bucket now has a hole, and now I seek connection outside of the relationship even more. So it becomes a vicious cycle. And so start by writing out exactly what you need for this relationship dynamic to work out, to turn around. What do you need? Do you need more consistency? Do you need more validation? Do you need to have more communication in the actual relationship dynamic? And then I would reach out and I would say, hey, how are you? Let's have a chat, spend some time together. And that evening that you spend time together, I would say, I really enjoy your company. I realize that I've pervasively not been communicating my boundaries, and I'm no longer willing to do that. And so I want you to know this is where I stand. This is what my needs are going forward. If you're able to show up for at least a part of them, that's a good start, and we can keep building momentum together in the relationship. But if you're not able to do any work or show up in any way, then I can't continue this because it's not fair to me. And so that's how I would communicate that and start that conversation. And you owe it to yourself right this second to do that work. So I totally commend you for your accountability. I think that's so strong and courageous and correct in your thinking. And at the same time, you still have to show up for yourself. So it's this very interesting dynamic, right? Of like sort of this fine line to walk between not abandoning yourself and not blaming. So great work and great question. Okay, so Efrat says, hi Efrat. I discovered my ex is not as dismissive as much as she is an ENFP. It's so interesting. I was just talking about ENFPs today. Which the two seem to share behaviors. Okay, so they can and don't. So they have certain behavioral patterns because ENFPs like really like their freedom and autonomy. So there can be that component of it. But a lot of ENFPs are anxious preoccupied. I would say more ENFPs that I've seen over the years are anxious preoccupied or fearful avoidant than dismissive avoidant. So it can be confusing because a lot of them share the personality needs of freedom, autonomy, independence, things like that. And so they can present that way to a certain degree in terms of sharing some certain personality needs of dismissive avoidance. I cannot wait. Like I've been really trying to, I know a lot about MBTI, but I don't teach content that I don't feel like I have expertise in, like actually like I would feel like I have to be an expert in, because I want to provide high quality stuff. So I've been studying all the associations between people's MBTI personality qualities and attachment styles. And by early or mid next year, I hope to have built out like a full personality quiz that encompasses both, so that we can make these types of distinctions. But I'm not quite there yet. But amazing question. I love that you asked that, Efrat. And it's so cool that you're doing a deep dive into that. Okay, so let's see. Hi, Jamie. Hello, Kelly and Cecilia. Good to see you, Cecilia. Okay, so the next question I have is, hello, Max. How are you? Happy belated birthday. Let's see. Hello, Esther. Which attachment style am I addressing now? I'm just addressing all of them. We're just doing sort of an open format in terms of talking about the different attachment styles and how they show up in the different stages of relationships. Wow. Okay, I like this. Hello, Brooke. I've been doing a lot of inner work and I'm leveling up in all areas. It makes me feel raw to be seen. Thoughts? Yes. It's not being seen. It's the meaning you give to being seen. So write that out. Okay. It's not the being seen. What am I afraid will happen if I get seen? What do I make being seen mean? Or what are my earlier programmed associations to being seen? I know, for example, that I'll just give you some like examples that I see. I've seen people who in childhood had very controlling parents. And so when they were seen for who they were, they felt chronic lack of acceptance. So for example, let's say mom and dad are very authoritarian. Let's say they both want you to be a doctor and a lawyer and behave a certain way and be perfect with all of your manners. And maybe you want to, be a professional athlete, or you want to do something that is not okay with them in childhood, let's say. And so you make being seen for who you are mean that you're absolutely going to be shamed and controlled, and you're not going to be worthy of love and acceptance. So those would be examples of earlier programmed associations. Okay. And so what you need to do is find exactly out what those things are. And then once you've done that, you have to do the reprogramming work around those stories, okay, which the Emotional Mastery and Belief Reprogramming course will take you through in a tremendous amount of detail. Or you can just pluck out your favorite tools from the Subconscious Reprogramming course as a whole and plug those stories into those tools. And then you also have to do a little bit of exposure work. So you want to start getting seen in little tiny increments over time. So show a little bit of personal stuff to somebody you really trust, who's close, and then keep opening yourself in sort of layers over time so that your subconscious mind has the opportunity to build in positive emotional associations to being seen. So you keep feeling good about it and like it's thriving and empowering. And then eventually that'll be your new normal. So great question. Okay, so the next question I see, let's see. I see you guys are chatting. I love how much our community like chats and gets together. Hello, Samantha. And has such a great conversation here. Okay, Sarah. So if I miss any comments, remember you guys to tag me in the questions too, if you can. Thais, why do DAs crave consistently, yet they're extremely inconsistent themselves? How do you stay consistent with them when they constantly push you away? Because they crave consistency because they're consistent in the relationship to themselves. They try to be consistent with their time to themselves. So that's like a need for them that they meet. But as a byproduct of being so focused on the consistency with self, it's easy to be inconsistent with others, right? Because it's like, if anything interferes with time to self, then, I have to push away other people or flake on other people so that I can have that consistency here because that's first priority. So that's what you'll see there is the like external manifestation of that. How do you stay consistent with them when they constantly push you away? By having proper conversations. Your job is not to walk on eggshells with anybody. Your job is not to be consistent at the expense of your own needs. Your job is to be aware of those needs and take them into consideration while also communicating and advocating for your own needs so that we have compromises instead of sacrifices. Because then there's just going to be resentment and things like that being created. So excellent question and great awareness. And I hope that makes sense. And your job is to like every time you do something to meet that need, make sure you take yourself into consideration. Like, hey, does this feel okay for me? Does this feel good for me? Is this appropriate for me? Is this fair to me in the process of doing that? And if it's not, you have to have a conversation to communicate more clearly with that person. So great question. Okay, I think this is for me as well. So Chrissy says, I am an AA who was with an FA. My traits were 100% DA towards the end, due to frustration of the FA not articulating needs and then blowing up with resentment, can we change type situationally? Yeah, like you are going to have a certain attachment style that you have and you carry. You're going to get polarized by who you're with. So if you're with somebody who's really anxious and you're fearful avoidant, you're more likely to have that avoidance side. But you can also just have resentment or disinterest. And that's independent of attachment styles, although the expression of that experience might seem like it's in alignment with the expression of an attachment style. So for example, if you have all this built up resentment, it doesn't matter how AA you are. If you don't trust the person, you're frustrated, you're resentful, you're upset, and you're losing interest and the romance is gone, you're going to present DA. But it's not because you're a dismissive avoidant. It's because you've got all that stuff going on that's impacting the relationship. And the same thing can go for like, you can be, super anxious, but then if somebody's interested in a relationship and you have zero attraction or romantic interest in them, they might think you're dismissive avoidant, but really you're just not interested, right? So it's an excellent question. And the answer is yes, you can still change type situationally as well. You can get polarized to becoming more anxious if you're with somebody more dismissive or vice versa. But that specific thing you're talking about, like the root of frustration and all the resentment, that's just the expression of being very resentful and frustrated in a relationship. So great question. Let's see. The next question I see is Minerva. Hello, Minerva. Thais, do people who work to not be codependent, are able to stay with that partner or leave because they misinterpret love as codependency? You can absolutely stay with a partner. In fact, I encourage people, if they're working on things in relationships, to not, like, you don't have to be single or together to work on this stuff. Like, either one works, and it's just going to be a different experience. So for example, if you are in a relationship and you're going, I identify this relationship as being codependent at this time, okay? You want to sit down, and this is exactly the work I would do. I would sit down, I'd write out all the parts of the relationship that are codependent. What about this is codependent? We take on each other's feelings and feel responsible for them. We don't set boundaries with each other. We're not communicating our needs. We're trying to mind read each other's needs, whatever it might be. And then what I would sit down and do is I would have that conversation and be like, listen, I'm invested in this relationship. I'm very interested. I want it to work. And I'm learning that this isn't going to work the way it's been working. So here are our patterns. This is what I think we need to work on. Let me start and lead the way by expressing my needs and my boundaries. Here's what they are. Think of them ahead of time, bring them to the table in conversation. I want to start expressing these things to you. I want us to be able to hold space for them. And I really want you to take some time to figure out yours and bring them back here so we can understand each other instead of playing the mind reading game, or so we can be accountable for our own feelings instead of making each other responsible for them. These sorts of things, because then you have healthy interdependence. And just like people who are experiencing a lot of apathy in their relationships and are like two passing ships in the night, can rebuild connection, can rebuild romance through certain tools and techniques and showing up and communicating and being vulnerable all over again and sharing more and expressing needs. We can also have two codependent or enmeshed people actually break into healthy interdependence through the same methods and modalities, or strategies, really. So great question. So the only time I wouldn't want to spend time with my romantic partner is if I'm genuinely not interested in them. Is that an FAA thing? Yeah, largely. And it doesn't mean that people who don't want to spend time with a romantic partner are not interested. Some people are very interested, very in love in their relationships, and don't want to spend the time with their romantic partner, need extra time to themselves, have things to do, are focused in other areas, have different personality needs that make them subconsciously prioritize other things differently, all of those things. So great questions. Hello, Claire. Hello, Veglissa. Hi, Thais. Do DAs find themselves really tired once interacting? I'm hanging out with a DA and he's always tired or wants to nap. It's very common. It's also common that we get tired when we're living incongruently with our personality needs. So for example, like, I'm not saying anything negative about history. Like, I think history can be so interesting for so many people. For me personally, I can remember doing courses. I don't know if it was university or high school or what it was, but I remember being in like history classes and being like, every time I went to history class, I wanted to fall asleep, like so tired. But like you can have these experiences, right? Where when you're out of alignment with something or you're not interested, you're not present, you're not, there, you're not focused. And so I'm not saying that like you in any way are boring to this person, but I'm saying if this person has very low needs around, romantic relationships or emotional connection, they're not going to be as present or on board. So there's a couple different ways of approaching this, and this is not uncommon for dismissive avoidance. And dismissive avoidance can be so interested in a person and still have the output of that experience. So either you can start to identify what this person's personality needs are by asking them or noticing like what they do like to spend time thinking about, focusing on, what they spend their money and energy on, what they research naturally, where they're naturally invested, and start introducing those things into conversation, because that's when somebody's going to light up. You can also just recognize that, hey, I want to be with somebody who's more interested in focus and set a boundary in the relationship. And then the last thing I will say about your question too, giving you all the different angles, is that dismissive avoidance as well, sometimes when they feel sometimes they're like the enmeshed dismissive avoidant, and they're a little bit like codependent because they're already running on empty largely emotionally, because they're neglecting and repressing their own emotions. Then to give their emotions and their availability to somebody can feel like you're like pushing a car instead of driving it because there's no gas left. And so then you'll see the expression of that in that form as well. So it can be that the person's out of their personality needs. It can be that they're running on empty and that's the person you're going to get. Or it can be that, hey, like this isn't a good fit for you in the relationship. And so you can either understand their personality needs and introduce those things into the relationship dynamic more, or decide, you know what, I want somebody who's more present and more available, and communicate that. So I hope that makes sense from all the different angles. Great question. Hello, Anjali. Yes, it's never the situation itself, but the meaning we give to it. Always, always, always. I want you guys to all remember that for life. Okay, so I think you guys are all just chatting still. Pupak. I hope I said that correctly. Is it common that a DA demands their needs openly? What if we can't fulfill a DA needs as they wish to? Do they often criticize their partner for not meeting their needs as they expect them to? Okay, so great question. Usually no. Usually a dismissive avoidant will not criticize, they'll shut down and pull away. That's usually the go-to coping mechanism. That's not going to be the case 100% of the time, but that's definitely a large pattern. That's number one. Number two, is it common that they didn't demand their needs openly? No. This sounds to me more like an FA person who's maybe leaning DA. But again, yes, it's absolutely possible. Dismissive avoidance, the only needs that you'll see them state openly, whoops, sorry, I know I blurred out. The only needs you'll see them state openly are their survival needs. They're really good with their survival needs. I need space, I need time, like things that they feel are like to just like be okay, to just normalize, to equilibrate. You'll get them their survival needs. Their emotional needs in terms of like what they're feeling. Hey, I need some more validation or acknowledgement in the relationship. Hey, I'm feeling insecure and I need to know that we're in a good space. Like things that are emotionally based, you're not going to really hear them say because they're really out of touch with their emotional needs, yet they're very in touch with survival needs. So you'll see them definitely state their survival needs a lot. Like, hey, I need to go now. I need to, and it can be kind of blunt because it's actually coming from like a fight or flight survival oriented space. So I hope that makes sense. And your job, if you're on the receiving end of that, is to take those needs into consideration, to hear them, to see them, to understand them, but then to tune into yourself and see, is this what I want? Are these sacrifices or compromises? And can I bring my needs to the table too, so that we have a healthy mutual exchange of energy in the relationship and nobody's experiencing any resentment as a result? So great question, as a result of not having that, to be clear. So Preston says, hello, Preston. A memory hit me this week of when I would get stuck in anger because I felt disrespected. Good to see you, by the way, Preston. Because I felt disrespected, unimportant, unwanted, or any other wound. My partner would attempt to come towards me / I could not get rid of my anger block until, of course, they would reject me or push me away themselves. And then like magic, it all goes away and I immediately want to fix and bring them close. Was that just the same wound being triggered in the form of rejection, which is more painful than anything else? As such, I would activate. I've been out of a relationship, as you know, and would like to strengthen this past reaction by understanding, wow, what is going on with it? Anger is still all consuming for me. And this is why I stay away from intense feelings of any sort. Okay. So number one, amazing insights and awareness. And number two, yes, it's that you have a side of your fearful avoidance. That's when it's like this. If you can imagine that you could watch the landscape of what's happening, it goes, this person hurt me. I'm talking as your subconscious mind, okay? And I have to like really focus for a second. In order. This person hurt me, and now I associate that they're the cause of my pain. But I don't know that I'm making an association, because to a certain degree, whatever they said or did might very well have been a cause of my pain. But the intensity that's bringing that degree of anger into the dynamic is not because of them. It's actually because of my stored subconscious wounds and unresolved emotional experiences from the past. And because the subconscious mind stores every memory ever with all of the emotion intact, all that's flooding to the surface. So I'm now experiencing the pain from what that person did, combined with all of my stored emotional pain. And because the subconscious mind is wired to avoid pain and it's projecting all of that pain onto the person because the person catalyzed it, it now thinks that person is causing this much pain. And then fearful avoidance often have a flight response. So now it's like, I need to push you away to protect myself to get rid of that pain. But then you have the other anxious attachment style wounds. And though this is so much pain, this is so much unsafety. Abandonment equals I am unsafe. And so at the end of the day, that avoidance side can be strong and very strong at that, because the emotional things are around your emotions. But just from like a hierarchy of needs perspective, from like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, your subconscious mind will still, when it comes down to it, prioritize its survival needs and things related to safety over its emotional needs and things related to self-esteem, belonging, and connection. So in other words, you have the deactivating, you're experiencing that because you don't think you're going to be abandoned. Then when the person pulls away, if it activates abandonment and safety wounds, then all of a sudden you're going to stop paying attention to the pain and anger over here, because you're going to prioritize keeping the connection alive and not being abandoned so that you can stay safe and survive as a result instead. And this is only because we substitute in our, unconsciously we do this, our romantic relationships replace our primary caregivers in our adult lives at a subconscious level. They become our primary attachment figure. And so the things that we would feel in childhood, we're naturally projecting onto that relationship. And so we treat them at a subconscious level through that same lens. So that's what's happening. Now, what's required to do in order to transcend that experience is to understand all those triggers and what they're made up of. Almost always for fearful avoidance, when you're experiencing that degree of anger is a symptom of not communicating your needs, because anger usually for fearful avoidance meets specific needs. Okay, remember, everything that we do, every way we behave is some kind of strategy to get a need met. So anger usually gets you to finally set boundaries, gets you seen and heard because you get loud, right? Even if it's not the most effective version, your brain wants the fastest way of getting its needs met, not the best. So you get seen, you get heard, you set a boundary, and often you take your power back if you've been disempowering yourself through excessive people pleasing and not speaking up. And so in one fell swoop, that entire expression of anger takes all of that back and equilibrates it. And so to me, when I hear that a fearful avoidant who's in recovery, especially, I know you're doing such great work, if you still find that anger is a problem, I would take a really good look at, where do I not express my needs? Where do I not share vulnerably enough my feelings? Where do I not speak up for my needs consistently enough or set boundaries? Where do I feel unseen or unheard in my life? And what are strategies I can put in place to correct all of those underlying patterns? And what you'll see is if you do that, there's no need for anger. So the anger falls away. So if you can correct all the things that led up, all the root causes for why the expression of anger occurs, then the anger won't be an issue any longer. So I hope that makes sense. It's a really, really great question. Okay, so I know that was a really long answer. Okay, so Lisa says, how can you tell the difference between a narcissist and an FA? I'm AA, bonded so closely during honeymoon phase. but now he does avoidant behavior and I'm not sure how to handle it. Okay, so a bunch of ways. So narcissists can be FA attachment styles, but definitely not all FAs are narcissists, and definitely not all narcissists are FA attachment styles either. So it's like 2 steps removed. Narcissists can be AAs or DAs, but more so AAs than DAs. A few really core ways that you're going to tell the difference. Fearful avoidance will go out of their way to not exploit people. And in the DSM, one of the main qualities that would qualify you as narcissist is to be advantageous or exploitive of other people. There's 9, you need 5 of 9. So it doesn't have to be there, but it's very common. So fearful avoidants carry this huge core wound, usually of I am bad, and they go out of their way a lot of the time to not be bad. And you'll only see them be angry or do things when they feel really, really like threatened or hurt. Like they'll respond to things, not initiate trying to take advantage or exploit. Okay, that's one thing. Another really big thing that you'll see is fearful avoidants don't usually love so much attention. You'll see with narcissists, like a true narcissist, at least a grandiose narcissist, you'll see that they are largely seeking attention, always wanting attention, validation, those sorts of things. Fearful avoidants usually more want depth of connection. And if they're around a group of people, they're not going to be like fighting for the center of attention. They're probably going to be like connecting with 1 or 2 people at a time. Okay. Like really in close, more bonded connections. Another couple things that you'll see as well is that narcissists will be very, very manipulative, and they'll go out of their way to like manipulate, do things that are like intentionally manipulative, premeditated, things like this. Fearful avoidance, they can have manipulative patterns surface when they are, these are the very unhealed. Fearful avoidance can have manipulative patterns surface when they are triggered, but they're not going to be like masterminding plans to try to manipulate a person or things like that. And even in and of itself, and not justifying this for anybody, but it's important to know that if anybody's exhibiting manipulative patterns or is on the receiving end of a manipulative pattern, what's underneath that is that people manipulate when they don't know how to express their needs, because they think the brain's a needs meeting machine. So it's going to try to get your needs met in some form or another. And if you can't get your needs met directly, it's going to go in these roundabout ways to try to get its needs met. And then it's going to end up as some sort of like manipulative pattern. Other things that you'll see, narcissists tend to be very good with their boundaries and tend to be like very clear about what they want and demanding of it and showing up for it. Fearful avoidants tend to really struggle with their boundaries. They tend to like overgive. Although we can see narcissists who overgive, but it's specifically in the love bombing phase. Fearful avoidance, you'll see overgive throughout the course of a relationship, but then they become resentful when they perceive an imbalance, and then frustrated. And then usually they experience a lot of guilt and are extremely, extremely empathetic. Fearful avoidants have the problem of usually being enmeshed, so they tend to feel for other people's feelings more than their own. And that's pretty congruent. Narcissists can struggle to express or feel empathy to a certain degree, unless, and especially if it's when they have a need and something is rubbing up against their need. Okay, so they can struggle to express empathy, feel empathy. They won't feel guilt and shame. They'll at a conscious or pre-conscious level, they won't. But a lot of their personality structure is built around avoiding shame as a whole and not taking ownership of it. Fearful avoidants will often admit fault after an argument or a problem. Not always, and sometimes they can be difficult about it. But if there's vulnerability in a conversation and they feel safe to do so, they'll be quick to do that. They'll be apologetic. You'll rarely see that from narcissists. So there's so many things I could say and go on, but hopefully that gives you enough context to get started in terms of some of the differences that you'll see and how to sort of pinpoint those behaviors. So great question. Okay, so the next, hello, Summer, how are you? Hello, Crystal from Kenya. How cool is that? Welcome. Nice to have you here. Hi, Jamie. Hello, Isha. Okay, so Isha says, I've been in an on and off situation for 3 years, which finally turned into an FWB, friends with benefits, with a suspected DA who is very clear that that's all it is. Yet I feel the need for significance not being met, since it's a matter of time before it ends. This triggers my abandonment wound. Then Isha goes on to say, I'm not sure how to ask him why he's in my life without getting a wishy-washy answer, because he tends to deflect. I realize I want the validation of knowing that he wants me, but not sure how to address this without him thinking I'm romantically interested in him, which I'm not since we don't have a future. Interesting. Okay. Let me touch on a few things here, Isha. So number one, the first thing I would encourage you to do is sit for a moment and like not in this moment, but take some time to really consider and sit and ask yourself, is friends with benefits okay with me for this person? Is that something that I want? If it is, and you're like, yes, it's something I want and I would choose, amazing. You're in the perfect situation. If you're like, no, that's actually not something I want, but it's something I'm settling for because I like this person, then you want to make sure that you do something to correct that pattern, because you want to make sure that you're in a situation that's very fair to yourself. Okay. The next thing that I want to touch on here is the need for significance. If you're like, I do want friends with benefits because I'm working on myself and I'm not interested in this person long term, and if that's like your truth, then you can ask for significance. Hey, words of affirmation are important to me. I'm not saying to you that I'm trying to have like a romantic situation, but I want us to be able to complement each other more. You can say those things. I want to know that I'm wanted in a situation. I would appreciate that. You can communicate those things in any situation, in a friendship, in a romantic relationship, and in a friends with benefits situation, whatever it is. Now, if you are like, I'm not that invested in the relationship and don't even want to derive my needs for significance from there, then you can also go and just, start validating your own wins, start encouraging yourself, being gentle in your internal dialogue so that there's no criticism leaking your bucket of significance in your internal dialogue all day long. You can ask for significance from friends and family, try to derive more of it from work or things that you're doing. So you have all those options. But I have this like sneaking suspicion that it's actually more about wanting certainty and wanting to know that certainty will happen in the relationship. So what I would recommend doing is, if that's the case, making sure that you get that in other forms and that you manage your expectations around this person if they've explicitly communicated where they stand, and then make sure that you're clear about your boundaries and if that's fair for you, and really tune into your needs and take yourself into consideration so that you can act accordingly. So that's my full answer to that. I hope that makes sense, and it's a great, great question. Let me see. The next question, I was dating a DA on and off for 3 years because he didn't want to get married. 2 weeks later, he was posted up in a cafe next to my gym. Was he trying to reconnect? On and off for 3 years, 2 weeks. I mean, probably, because dismissive ones love to do really sort of indirect things. And especially after 3 years of a relationship, usually they don't like change and don't like being in that situation. So yes, most likely. Because usually what we'll actually see is if a dismissive avoidant ends a relationship, they go out of their way to avoid the person. They won't be in a cafe next to where they know you'll be very often. So yes, highly probable. But again, I can't know anything for certain. Maybe he was in the area or something happened, or who knows. Of course, there could be circumstantial situations. But if I had to say a guess based on the patterns of a DA, I would say that sounds most likely. Yes, Summer. I will think about like recording that and putting that on YouTube or something, but I'll definitely do it. I want to put like a story up or do like case studies of people as they go through their relationship as well. And I was going to use some of that as a share. Thank you for reminding me. I can't believe you remembered that. That's so sweet. Okay, so the next question I have is, and if I miss any questions, please just remember to tag me in the comments. Jackson says, hi, I am FA, dated a female DA for 4 years. Her dad passed away 5 months ago. Later we struggled and she broke it off. How does grief of death affect the different attachment styles? Yeah, honestly, it usually goes in one of two directions, and it's very polarized for dismissive avoidance. It can be that they really want security, and so then they really hold on to a relationship, or it can be that they really feel like, oh my gosh, I have all these emotions and I can't be responsible for emotionally investing myself in a relationship until I get my own emotions straightened out, and they want things cut and dry and like really broken down into clear areas. And so then they can show up and they can instead push people away when they're grieving big time. And I would say I see that happen a little more often than its alternative. And so 5 months later, we struggled. I wonder how long ago it was, but it will definitely create some painful dynamics. So what I would do if I were you, Jackson, is I would definitely do like how to heal from a breakup, like the actual course, because it's all about processing your own grief around that and become really whole. And then if that person comes back around after they've done some of their own processing, then you have an option of deciding like what your boundaries are and if it's worth reinvesting in that relationship or not. But at least in the meantime, you've done all the healing work for yourself. So great question. Aviel says, what are the 6 stages of a relationship? Wow, what an important question. Sorry, I'm sort of assuming sometimes that everybody knows because I put all this stuff on about them for a while. So the 6 stages of a relationship are the dating phase, okay? And the dating phase is usually, so a really important thing about the dating phase is that they often, sorry, not they. In the dating phase, people have such different expectations. Like this is, when I have had conversations with people over the years from different attachment styles, it's almost mind-blowing to me. Like anxious, preoccupied individuals, they often want to jump into a relationship within a matter of weeks. Fearful avoidance usually want to wait a few months. Dismissive avoidance usually want to wait, like sometimes 6 months is normal for them before they commit to a relationship and to something related to exclusivity. And I don't mean like marriage. I mean like a relationship. Secure individuals tend to sort of match their partners sort of dynamics, but the average secure person wants to wait around 3 months as well. So very similar to the fearful avoidant, but for different reasons, right? Because they're actually doing the proper vetting and taking the time and don't feel rushed. Fearful avoidants usually really want connection. So a part of them wants to go really fast and then a part of them pulls back. And then usually it ends up being around 3 to 4 months before they're open to making a commitment. So it's interesting because in the dating phase, we have so many different expectations and patterns that affect everything. So we have our dating, then we have our honeymoon phase. And in the advanced attachment style courses, Aviel, there's like so much detail about all of this. So then we have our honeymoon phase, which is characterized by like the higher neurochemicals and infatuation and oxytocin and serotonin and dopamine and all these different things. And then we have our power struggle phase, which has the rite of passage of learning. Rites of passage are to learn to express ourselves, our fears, our wounds, communicate our needs, and hold space to accept another's flaws and for them to communicate their feelings and needs and experiences accordingly, which then moves us into the stability phase. And then this is where we finally come out of like all the elevated neurochemicals in the high and then all the lows of the power struggle and the challenges. And we kind of just reach a baseline, and it's a really important time to instill healthy patterns and dynamics into our relationship, like how often we see each other, what our communication is like, do we still have date nights and times together where we really invest in growing the relationship, even though we've already been through all the strong ups and downs. Then the commitment phase, where it's a great time to start having the real committed conversations about the future and how many kids and where you want to live and all those different things. And then the bliss phase comes as a result of doing all that heavy work, which is sort of like the honeymoon phase, but where you fully see, hear, and understand your partner instead in that phase. So all of that is sort of what comes together. And that's the life cycle of a relationship. And we can regress at different times if we don't get the proper rites of passage or lessons out of the stages in terms of the relationship progression that we're meant to. So great question. Hello, Nick. So Nick says, do you have any thoughts regarding love addiction? I'm an AP working on being secure and joined a support group for men, and I'm having resistance with this idea of wanting to be loved or in a relationship as an addiction. I'm just curious to your thoughts. I think yeah, I totally see why you could have some resistance. I think everything in terms of addiction exists along a continuum. But I think one of the most important things we can ever do for ourselves in our lives is to write a list of all the things we might be addicted to. I think addiction goes far beyond love. I think people can have addiction to television, addiction to video games, addiction to gossiping, addiction to, and I don't mean addiction in terms of like full-blown addiction, but I mean addiction in terms of we keep doing something even though we know it has detrimental effects, and we keep repeating the same behavior to achieve the same initial desired result despite the negative consequences. And so it's just, you can think of us as having like addictive strategies or coping mechanisms we've latched onto to get needs met that have a lot of unhealthy downsides, okay? So, and that are meant to help us escape from maybe potential subconscious pain we're carrying in the first place. So I do believe in the idea of love addiction, but I think we really have to put that into perspective by looking at it as being along a continuum. So people can have an addiction to food, right? People can have an addiction to sugar. People can have an addiction to all sorts of things where it's like, you know that this thing is unhealthy, you know, and the love addiction could be, you know, you're in an unhealthy relationship, or you know you need to take time to be alone or prioritize yourself as much as you do your relationships, and yet you keep not doing that and repeating the same patterns of behavior to try to get this outcome despite those negative consequences. But we might look, if it was along a continuum, and we might look at like something like drug addiction as being on the higher level of the continuum. And then we might look at love addiction as being something that's sort of here. And then we might look at things like, you know that you should be having self-care habits, or you know that you should be doing inner work or having balance or exercise, but you binge watch like, you know, we could have low level addictions, which are just like negative coping mechanisms that we find ourselves unable to break free from. And all that really means at a subconscious level is that you have these hardwired strategies built in for how to get your needs met that are not the most optimized strategies for your life, that became coping mechanisms to deal with pain at a point. Your subconscious mind built built positive emotional associations next to, hardwire those in, and then when you have a triggering event or a painful thing, you go to that thing. Even though your conscious mind knows better or wants something different, you find yourself unable to break that pattern. So that's how I would look at it, but I would really look at it as being along a very strong continuum. And if you want to change that, what we have to do is we have to understand what needs that addiction is meeting in the first place. Start meeting those needs for ourselves in a much better, much more updated form. So for example, like, you know, what is the relationship giving to you? Maybe it's giving you excitement. Maybe it's making you feel important or wanted. Maybe it's making you feel love and connection. Okay, that tells you that there's an absence of those things in your life on a pervasive basis at a subconscious level, which means when you get your hands on those things, you hunger for them so deeply that they seem to have power over you. And it's really just your subconscious having more power over your conscious mind. And so you want to update your strategies for getting your needs met perpetually enough that your subconscious mind now learns to rely on these new patterns instead of those old ones. And then you also want to deal with any underlying pain that's causing you to seek that out in the first place. So I have a really in-depth addiction course that goes into that. You can definitely apply love addiction to it. And yes, it's different than like a hardcore drug addiction, but it still expresses the same patterns of any other addiction at the root level. So I hope that makes sense. And Sarah, I'm just choosing them based on the order. So I'm just seeing the questions in here, and then it's always better if you tag me in them as well in case I overlook them as I'm scrolling down. Okay, so I'm going to answer one more question, and I'm going to go into the open Q&A webinar. So Amy says, hi, Thais, going to something you just mentioned. If an FA prioritizes work, family, or hobbies over time with me, does that indicate how much they care or love me? No. And it's so interesting because people will think that, right? But some people will, it's like, you can think of it as being the difference to a certain degree between, and I'm just giving you one example. This doesn't cover all, this is just an analogy. It's sort of like somebody can have their highest needs as romantic relationships, emotional connection, social connection, things that involve people, so they can prioritize the relationship because that's getting their personality needs met. But then they could also be getting those needs met from all these other people, or the moment those things aren't going that well, they can be interested in deriving new romantic connections very quickly. So it doesn't have to be, and that won't always be the case either if those are somebody's personality needs, just to be clear. But somebody making a priority doesn't impact exactly how much they care or value the relationship. It just impacts how they prioritize things. It doesn't necessarily symbolize the amount of feelings they have in a relationship itself. Okay, so really important to be clear about, and it's an excellent question. Hi, Audrey. I was waiting to see your question. Working on a second chance, but don't see effort. I want to leave before the time I set. Good, before your deadline, because you don't see the effort. I hear that. I'm FA with him. He's AA. I stay too long historically. What to do if you don't want to meet a need, like making dinner more than I make for myself or eat. If you feel like you've set a deadline and then you feel like you're no longer interested, even though you've set that deadline, you're allowed to leave. You're allowed to say, no, you know what, I don't see the effort. It's not working. You're allowed to reassess and reevaluate your deadline. These don't have to be these like hardwired things. And then when it comes to not wanting to meet a need for this person, you can communicate that. Hey, I'm not interested in meeting that need. So, and because healthy interdependency or interdependence means I, as a human being, am capable of evaluating my needs, meeting my own needs, expressing my needs, and receiving them from others, which in those 4 quadrants means if somebody's not able to show up in one area, that's okay. If you can't meet my needs, I can meet my needs. And so it's important to bring needs into the relationship, to communicate them, to share them. But it doesn't mean we're responsible for each other's needs by any means. It means we're responsible for navigating a relationship in a healthy way by doing that in the first place. So I hope that that makes sense. Okay, I'm going to jump right into the other Q&A webinar. I might grab water really quick because I'm so thirsty and it's for some reason really warm in here. So I might be there in just a moment. But a huge thank you to everybody who's here for today, and a huge thank you for being here and being so wonderful and communicating with everybody in the community, and sending lots of appreciation to everybody. And I will see you guys in the next webinar momentarily. Bye, guys. Bye.